Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Wells. I write horror, fantasy, and science fiction, and I talk about games on the internet. Today I'm going to be talking about the Storyteller's Toolkit for Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition. This toolkit comes with a GM screen that we'll be looking at and a little booklet that we'll be looking at as well. Let's start with the GM screen. I really love 5th edition of this game, and I have not played any of the previous ones. I am not a Vampire the Masquerade person from all the way back in the day. This is my first exposure to it, and I really, really like what they've done with it. They have this GM screen, so it's enormous. It is a quadrifold, so it's pretty big, and inside there is a ton of really fantastic information. So it's super awkward to try to show you what's on a GM screen, so I'm just going to tell you it's got so much information on here. It's one of the better GM screens that I have seen or reviewed. The first little panel over here, let's just kind of try to show you this guy right here. This includes, what the dice does, what the dice do, how do you determine the difficulty of things, how do you, all the kind of basic stuff of how to run the game, including some little ideas down here of, well, what happens if you get critical hits or if you have bestial failures and things like that. So that all works. Then this second panel is all about blood and hunger. And the hunger mechanic is one of the things that I most enjoy about this game, and the way that it kind of mechanically incentivizes people, the players, to think about blood and to think about how they're going to eat tonight and all of these other things as they play their vampires. And so there's really detailed rules on feeding and how your hunger level changes based on how you're feeding, and it's kind of complicated, and they're all right here, so you don't have to be flipping through the book back and forth. It also has a huge table for blood potency, which is like how powerful you are as a vampire based on your generation, and things like that. And that's all here. And how does that affect feeding? How does that affect your powers? How does that affect everything else? All right there on one page. The third little trifold here deals with some similar things, like what happens when your humanity drops, what happens when you frenzy, and then the concept of humor and resonance. Humor being the 4 humors, the idea that there are 4 different flavors, I guess, of blood, and that they will react in different ways. Your character, depending on the powers that you have or depending on your personality, different blood from different people will affect you in different ways. It's another kind of fiddly little rule that is all right here and all explained on the GM screen, which makes it super easy to run everything. And then, of course, it's got on this 4th and final panel, yay, ranged combat, weapon combat. What do you do for armor and injuries, and how does social damage work, and all of that. So you could almost just run the entire game just with this GM screen and not with the book, because it has that much information packed into it. So really great, and I like the art that's on it. Anytime you got burning roses, then that is going to look cool. So the booklet is really nice as well. Now, this comes from Modiphius. It's the same company that does the 2D20 games like Infinity and Star Trek Adventures and Conan and John Carter and so on and so on. They've all got GM toolkits as well. This booklet is very different from those booklets. It doesn't have the same kinds of information in it. Those other ones have like random adventure generators and things like that. This one doesn't, and it's fascinating. It is, in fact, one of the most interesting and most unique Game Master supplements I've ever seen for any game. It starts off with just kind of some basic GMing advice. You know, how do you GM this? How do you do horror? You know, some little kind of basic tips on lighting and music, like if you want to add atmosphere to it. There's a couple of different places that talk about LARPing and the influence that LARPing, and in particular Nordic LARPing, have had on vampire, which is kind of cool. There's a whole section on what you can do. I mean, there's a whole page on where you can find other vampire stories to inform your vampire story and get ideas or get tonal advice and that kind of stuff. And then we begin these two main sections of the book. And the first one is 100 Victims. And that's what it is. You can see here, let's zoom in close. And it says artist. And then it gives some sample names. And it gives some sample ideas of who are these artists, what do they want, what kind of resonance do they have in their blood. And it has that for 100 people. Every single one of these entries is unique, has both male and female names, or names that could be used for any gender you want. They've got, you know, these kind of basic ideas. So a bike messenger. Who they are, they're in a hurry. Get the gig, get the tip, get through this intersection. Coke don't pay for itself. And they're all written in this kind of fun style too, where it is suggesting personality and it is suggesting backstory without having to say, this is a bike messenger who is in a hurry, he has a Coke habit, he does all this other stuff. It's just saying, here they go. And what do they want? Their friend's approval, maybe with Coke or Coke-inspired cleverness. Resonance, choleric. Bikes hard, hates all cars, and the a-holes who drive them. So there are 100 of these. So if you need an NPC for any reason, they're called victims, which is funny because we're vampires and we eat humans, right? But any NPC that you need, you know, whether it's just that the characters are hungry and it's time to feed and we got to find who we can find, and so you just roll a D100, roll some percentile and say, well, I got a 31, and so it's a drunk guy on the street, you know, or a 32 is an emergency medical technician. Like, you can do that, or you can just say, well, you go into the hospital and there's an EMT there. What's his name? Oh, well, flip, flip, flip. His name is Bob Lovejoy, right? And then you know some little bit about him, and it's this section of 100 NPCs packs so much information into these tiny little entries, and so much variety, so many different types of people. There's a kebab seller, there's a hacker, there's a panhandler, there's a private eye, there's a longshoreman, there's everything is represented here, and it's just a wonderful resource that you can turn to for so many different things, whether you need a victim to eat or a person you can talk to or just anything at all. You just need an idea and you don't have one, and you flip this open and say, well, there's a trucker. He's walking back to the truck, stretching their legs or behind the wheel, taking a shortcut. What they want, go home and see the kids. Well, there you go. There's a story. Okay? What kind of a story can you get out of that? How does that change the way that the players are going to interact with this person once he mentions his kids, or once they see a picture of his kids on his dashboard or something like that? So there's just a lot of neat things. Now, the second such chapter is not 100 victims, it's 100 sites. This is not as immediately cool. I think it doesn't have that wow factor that the 100 victims has, at least for me. But it is just as interesting. So, and these are all in alphabetical order. So, you going to an airport? Well, then it has supporting cast. What are the kinds of people that you're going to see in an airport? Well, hurried passengers, over-attentive security personnel, flight attendants power napping. What kind of resonances are you likely to find there? What other systems? Well, any chase through security suddenly adds +3 to difficulty. Larceny tests to smuggle items through security begin at difficulty 5. It's often easier to suborn airport personnel, such as janitors. So, you want to set a scene in an interesting place, or just wherever. This gives you the chance to research it beforehand and plan ahead, or to, you know, just stumble into it. Your characters end up in a casino in the Jersey Shore or something, and you're like, well, what do I do with this? You flip it open to the casino. It gives you some ideas of what's going on, some quick The supporting cast is very helpful, but then also the other systems. What are the different ways that, mechanically, dice-wise, that this setting can change the options that you have and the ways that you interact with them. And that's the book. It goes through these 100 things, and then the very end, there's 50 omens. And the omens, I don't know how useful the omens are, but it's 2 pages and they're kind of fun. So you just roll percentile and say, I got a 53. So an albino squirrel catches its foot in the grating over the subway nearest the character's haven. How are your players going to interpret that? I have no idea. It's ridiculous. But they're kind of fun. And if you need omens, they've got them. But the main value of this is in that 100 victims and 100 sites section. So, awesome GM screen that makes this game so easy to run mechanically. Super awesome book that makes it very easy to run narratively. I consider this almost a must purchase for Vampire the Masquerade, especially if this is your first time running a vampire game or running any kind of GM, any kind of role-playing game at all. This is the kind of thing that is going to make it really easy for you to do what you need to do. So, awesome. Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition is a really great game. This is a really great supplement for it. I encourage you to check it out, and I will see you on my next review.